April 4th, 1945. The Allied armies were pushing rapidly across Germany. The air was warm. Trees were in bloom. Everything suggested springtime. But as the jeeps of the U.S. 4th Armored Division rolled along a quiet country road near the town of Gotha, they were stopped in their tracks, not by enemy fire, but by something far worse. It was a wall of odor, not brick or stone, but stench, so thick and overpowering that men gagged where they stood. It smelled of rotting flesh, of burned hair, of something profoundly wrong. It smelled like hell. General George S. Patton was riding in his command vehicle when he caught it. He sniffed the air and frowned. His first thought was industrial, perhaps a chemical plant or a glue factory rendering dead horses. He summoned his officers. "What is that smell?" he demanded. "Find out." Hours later, a jeep tore back toward headquarters. The officer inside was ghostly pale, trembling. He looked like a man who had seen something beyond comprehension. "General," he said, "you have to see this. You won't believe it." Patton did not hesitate. Curious as always, he drove to the source. The place was called Ohrdruf. It was the first Nazi concentration camp liberated by American forces on the Western Front. What Patton saw beyond those gates altered him forever. The man known as Old Blood and Guts, a general who loved battle, who had witnessed thousands of corpses on open fields, walked behind a shed and vomited. But once the sickness passed, something else took hold. Rage. Cold, focused, and terrifying. He did not simply want to free the prisoners. He wanted justice. Patton looked toward the nearby town. Clean streets, orderly homes. He saw German civilians peering from behind curtains, pretending nothing was happening. And then he gave an order that would become legend. "Round them up," he said. "Bring the mayor. Bring his wife. Bring the baker. Bring the butcher. They claim they didn't know. Then they're going to know." This is the story of the liberation of Ohrdruf, the day George S. Patton forced an entire German town to confront hell at gunpoint and the tragic, shocking suicide that followed. To understand Patton's fury, we must first see what he saw. Ohrdruf was not a massive extermination center like Auschwitz. It was a sub-camp of Buchenwald, but it was no less monstrous. When the tanks of the 4th Armored Division reached the barbed wire fences, the SS had already fled. Before escaping, they tried to erase their crimes. Prisoners too sick to march were machine-gunned. Bodies were stacked inside a shed and covered with quicklime to hasten decomposition. But time ran out. When American soldiers entered the camp, they were met by living skeletons, men in striped uniforms weighing barely 60 or 70 pounds. Their eyes bulged from hollow faces. There was no cheering. They were too weak. Instead, they reached out, touching the tanks, pressing their hands against the white stars painted on the armor, weeping as if to confirm it was real. General Walton Walker, one of Patton's hardest commanders, immediately called him. "General, come at once." Patton arrived with General Omar Bradley and General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the three most powerful men in the U.S. Army, men who had sent millions into combat, men who believed they had seen everything. They were wrong. Patton entered the camp upright and composed, riding crop in hand, helmet gleaming. He looked every bit the conqueror. But with each step deeper inside, his posture shifted. He saw the burial pits, the roll call square, corpses stacked like firewood, 20, 30, 40 at a time, naked, starved, shot execution style at the base of the skull. Patton stopped before one pile and stared. "My God," he whispered. A survivor, barely human in appearance, crawled toward him and tried to kiss his boots. Patton stepped back gently and helped the man to his feet. Tears filled his eyes. Then they entered the torture shed. Inside stood a whipping block. Its wood darkened by old blood. Hooks lined the walls where men had been hung by their necks until they suffocated. A prisoner who spoke English explained how the SS guards beat inmates to death for amusement. Eisenhower's face drained the color. He stood frozen. Bradley could not speak at all. But Patton was shaking with fury. He moved to the back of the shed. His aide saw his shoulders rise and fall. The toughest general alive was violently ill. When he returned, his voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of a battlefield commander. It was the voice of a prosecutor. He turned to a young American military policeman. "Did the people in town know about this?" "They say they didn't, sir," the MP replied. "They say they thought it was just a prison for criminals." Patton let out a short, bitter laugh. "They didn't know? The smell alone covers the entire countryside. They knew." Without waiting for Eisenhower's approval, Patton took control. He summoned a provost marshal and pointed his riding crop toward the town of Ohrdruf, a picturesque medieval village. Flower boxes in the windows, pristine streets, just 2 miles from piles of dead bodies. "Go into that town," Patton ordered. "Find the burgermeister. Find his wife. Find every prominent citizen, the doctors, the bankers. Bring them here." The MP hesitated. "Sir, what if they refuse?" Patton rested his hand on the ivory grip of his revolver. "They won't. Use trucks. Use bayonets if you must. Every one of them will walk through this camp today." It was a punishment not found in any manual, a sentence without precedent, forced witnessing. Patton intended to shatter denial, to grind their faces into the truth they had lived beside and chosen not to see. The next morning, trucks rolled up to the gates of the camp. The citizens of Ohrdruf climbed down. They were dressed in their finest clothes. Men wore suits and ties. Women wore dresses and neatly pressed coats. They looked irritated, offended. Some complained openly about the smell. Others held handkerchiefs to their noses. There was still arrogance in their posture. They were Germans, members of the so-called master race. Why were they being dragged to this filthy place? Patton gave his orders to the MPs. "Form a line. March them through. Do not let them turn away. If they close their eyes, jab them with a rifle, but make them look." And so the tour began. The civilians were brought to the first pile of bodies. They stopped. The murmuring ended. The complaints died in their throats. All that remained was the wind and the low buzzing of flies. They stared at the corpses, skeletal figures, skin stretched thin like parchment over bone. Some gasped. One woman collapsed to the ground, but the MPs hauled her back up. "Move," they ordered. "Keep moving." They were taken to the whipping block. They were taken to the ovens where bodies had been burned. They were forced to look into the open, glassy eyes of the dead. Patton watched closely. Like a hawk. At first there was shock, then horror. But then he noticed something else. Guilt. Some of the men began to sob. Some of the women screamed and shook uncontrollably. Others stared silently at the ground, unable to lift their eyes. They knew. Somewhere deep inside, they had always known. They had simply chosen not to see. Patton stepped in front of the mayor of Ohrdruf. The man was trembling. Patton locked eyes with him. "You knew, didn't you?" The mayor did not answer. He only shook his head as tears streamed down his face. Patton turned to his staff. "See," he said, "they are not a master race. They are just people who lost their souls." The forced march through the camp lasted 2 hours. By the end, the civilians were broken. Their arrogance was gone. Their fine clothes were coated in dust. The smell of death clung to their hair and fabric. They were loaded back onto the trucks and driven away, silent now, back to their spotless homes with flower boxes in the windows. Patton felt he had delivered justice. That night, he wrote to his wife. "I have never felt such anger," he admitted, "but I believe we taught them a lesson they will never forget." For some, the lesson was unbearable. The mayor of Ohrdruf and his wife returned home. They entered their living room. Perhaps they spoke about what they had seen. Perhaps they sat in silence. We do not know what they said, but we know what they did. The next morning, American soldiers went to the mayor's house with further orders. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again. Still nothing. They forced the door open. Inside, they found a mayor and his wife dead. Their wrists had been cut. Beside them lay a short note, written in German. It did not say much, but it said enough. We cannot live with this shame. When Patton was informed of the suicide, he showed no pity. He nodded grimly. Well, he said, that's 2 fewer Nazis we have to feed. It sounds cruel, but Patton had walked among the bodies of the innocent. He had no tears left for the guilty. The liberation of Ohrdruf did not only change Patton, it transformed Dwight D, Eisenhower. Eisenhower was normally calm, restrained, but after Ohrdruf, he became a crusader. He understood that one day people would deny what had happened. They would claim it was exaggeration, propaganda, lies. So he issued an order to every nearby unit. Bring cameras. Bring reporters. Photograph everything. Film everything. He famously said, get it all on record now, because the day will come when some son of a bitch will say this never happened. Eisenhower ordered thousands of American soldiers to walk through the camp. He wanted them to understand why they were fighting, why their friends had died. Before Ohrdruf, many soldiers believed the war was about borders and politics. After Ohrdruf, they knew it was about good and evil. One young GI wrote in his diary, I will never feel sorry for a German again. Now I know what we are fighting for. We are fighting monsters. Ohrdruf was small compared to camps like Buchenwald or Dachau, but it was the first, the camp that woke the world. Because of Patton's fury, because he forced civilians to walk through those gates, the veil of denial was torn away. The German people could no longer say, we didn't know. Patton made sure they knew. This moment hardened the American occupation. The illusion of a gentle peace ended. Denazification began. Patton is often remembered for his tanks, his ivory-handled pistols, his speeches about blood and guts. But on that bright April day in 1945, he was not just a general. He was a human being staring into pure evil, and he did not look away. He grabbed that evil by the neck and forced the world to see it. The mayor of Ohrdruf could not live with what he had seen. But because of Patton, the world will never be able to forget. Patton was right. Even today, there are people who deny these crimes ever happened. Eisenhower warned us about them. By watching this video, you are helping to keep the truth alive. If you believe this story must be remembered, please like the video so it reaches more people, and subscribe for the next episode, the story of how George S. Patton discovered Hitler's hidden billions in a salt mine. Thank you for taking the time to watch.